Hi everybody, Bearded Rogue here, and today we continue our Tony Unboxes in Oregon series with Box 15. Yay, Box 15. So, let's go through it. Let's see what I kept, shall we? So, first thing I have is Paradise Fallen from Crash Games. This is a game that I've only played once, and I really wanted to play it more before I decide whether it stays in the collection permanently or finds a new home. But it's an interesting little game where you're traveling from island to island and working to collect various things so that you can win the game. As you can see, it's been a while since I've played it, so that's why this one is still in my collection. I don't know how I feel about it right now, and I didn't want to just send it off if I didn't know enough. So, Paradise Fallen. Next, Boss Monster. I used to have the super fancy edition with the gold and all the extra cards and stuff like this, but Boss Monster to me is only an okay game. And there was another person in my game group who absolutely loved everything about it. And so I gave him my fancy copy and took his less fancy copy. Because it's an okay game. There's, it's a little bit crazy. It's a little bit draw dependent as to who wins. The idea behind it is solid. You're a video game boss building the level that the heroes have to go through to get to you. And you're trying to kill all of the heroes and kill enough heroes before too many heroes get through and defeat you, and you win the game. Or if you're the last boss who remains undefeated, you win the game. It's okay game. It's not like my favorite game. It's not my least favorite game. The art in it is really good pixel art, so if you like pixel art at all, which I do, then the artwork in here is superb. There's a lot of little in-jokes and references and various other things to, D&D, NES games, even some other board games. Overall, it's neat. Like I said, it's not my favorite game of all time, but it's good enough to stay in my collection. Boss Monster. Next is a game called Rise. This is an abstract game. Two-player abstract game, also from Crash Games. It's actually the game design of Michael Coe, who's now more famous for being the head of Gamelin Games. But this was the I don't know if it's his first design or his first published design. But as you can see, it's autographed up here. Yeah, it's a neat little abstract. You are placing hexes out on the board and trying to build these towers. It's got some very interesting dynamics inside the game as far as how it's played long term, and it's cool to try to build your towers or tear your opponent's towers down. I like to think and theme it in my head as I'm playing, whether it's, Stone Age societies building gigantic towers, or space age people, building wormholes to another dimension, whatever it is. It lends itself to kind of all of that as an abstract game, and it's a pretty good one. Rise. Speaking of Michael Coe as a designer, here is Dungeon Heroes. This is yet another Michael Coe design. It's this time Gamelin. It's really a neat idea. It's two-player. It's, again, very abstract-y. However, one player plays the heroes, and the other player kind of plays the dungeon. You place tiles over this board, a grid, and the one player tries to move their heroes through the grid to acquire 3 treasures to win the game. But the dungeon, of course, knows what the heroes' capabilities are and tries to build their dungeon with face-down tiles to, murder the heroes before they can get the treasure. It has some of the coolest meeples on the planet. These dungeon meeples. So like a thief and a goblin and a cleric and a skeleton and a wizard and an orc and a warrior and an ogre. I think they are, but they launched a whole like series of D&D-esque shaped meeples along with this when it first launched, or shortly after it first launched, and it's a really cool game. I like it a lot. It has an app implementation. I don't know if the app is still up and running, but it's extremely hard to play the app. Playing other people, I found much more to my taste, but this is one of those things that you can play in, half an hour on a lunch break with 2 players. That's a pretty solid game. I don't know if it's still in print. I don't know if it's still available. If it isn't, I hope it comes back, because it's a really good little game, and I like it. That's Dungeon Heroes. Let's see. Next, we have... So this is a game that has a bit of a story on it, and it's kind of one of my earliest introductions into the board game world. So, as you know, I'm the Bearded Rogue. I, in general, like rogues, thieves, fantasy-style characters of that nature. It's primarily what I played in D&D-type scenarios, and computer RPGs. It's my favorite kind of class. So, I grew up with Han Solo and Indiana Jones, and various other roguish type role models where brains and skill were much more important than brawn. So it's something that's always appealed to me. So I was just getting into the hobby, and I found Board Game Geek, and I found the game design section of Board Game Geek. And there were all sorts of print and plays and various other things like that. But one of the print and plays that I found was a game called Deca Thieves. Right here. And Deca Thieves was actually one of my first experiences with playtesting someone else's game. I printed out the print and play. In it, you all play different thieves guilds, and you're trying to amass the most money. Once somebody gets a certain number of coins, the game ends. And you use the various cards that you have to be able to take money from other people, to protect your own money, and various things of that nature. The big thing about this game is that I had a really big hand in going through the rule book. I had a really big hand in helping revise the text on the individual cards. And I talked back and forth with the designer a ton. He was a really cool guy. Loved his game design, was trying to do pretty much everything that he could in life. Designing game was on his bucket list, and he was really, really excited about getting a game out into the world. I was super excited when it came out on Kickstarter, and when I was able to support it, and it really was my first taste of being part of the hobby, and it's kind of what pushed me in the direction of game design. Unfortunately, that gentleman, Jason Fordham, the reason that it was on his bucket list is that the poor gentleman was dying of cancer. He didn't tell anybody this. It wasn't common knowledge to the backers. They had no idea that it was something that was happening. He just put a game out there that he designed in good faith to see if it would succeed or not. It did. He fulfilled his Kickstarter, even though he died mere weeks, if not months, after the Kickstarter fulfilled. And he got to see that. He got to live his dream of being a published game designer, putting out and publishing his own game. And I still have my copy. Gemstone Games, here was the company that he put it out as, in Deca Thieves. And I still have my copy, and this copy will not go anywhere, ever. He was a wonderful human being. He was fantastic to work with. He was really heavily involved in the theater community around Atlanta, and was just a really, really smart dude, and always had time for me, even though I was pretty much brand new into gaming, and I'd never done any kind of game design or playtesting or proofreading or anything like that anymore. Before this experience, he was a fantastic person to work with and a great entry into the hobby for somebody looking to kind of cut his teeth on game design and what it takes to bring a game to market. And I'm sad that he's not around anymore. I still get reminders on Facebook of his birthday and things like that, and I always think of this game and all the conversations that we had about it. Whenever that comes up, but it's still a bittersweet moment to me because I wish he was still here, and I'd love to have seen what his next game and the game after that would have been like, had he gotten the opportunity. But yeah, really cool dude. I'm so happy to have been part of that, and that game will stay in my collection as long as I live. All right, let's lower it a bit. Another game. Let's just kind of take a second here. Another game from early in the hobby that I got was Guillotine, and this is a game that a lot of people have heard of. It's not nearly as big as it used to be. I actually got my copy at a Wizards of the Coast store back when Wizards of the Coast had stores. It's from Paul Peterson. He's a really clever dude. He's done a whole bunch of other things since then. And I think he worked for PopCap currently. I don't know exactly. But this is a really interesting game in where you are playing to collect the heads of French nobles, which are worth various amounts of points. They're all in line at the guillotine, and all of the cards in the game allow you to rearrange the line so that you can put whoever you want at the front of the line so that that's the head that you collect, or so that you can, if you can't collect the one you want, you can throw the the people you would like to try to collect later or keep out of the hands of your opponents to the an area of the line where they can't be manipulated to the front of the line. It plays a series of days of these executions, and it's a silly, like, black humor type game. It's one of the few games on Earth that has a card in it. It may be the only game on Earth that has a card in it called the Piss Boy. It's just a very silly black humor, dark humor game, and was a really good quick card game that I could teach pretty much anybody, even people who hadn't gamed before. This is one of the games that I used to use to introduce people into the hobby, both because it shares my kind of humor and because it's a really good way to it's a really good game to learn, rules-wise. It's got a light overhead, and it does a lot of take-that type stuff that people are used to in games, while introducing some more advanced, more modern board gaming concepts. And that's Guillotine. Next, alright, we're going to go now into two different realms. Two of my favorite games of a particular genre that isn't always the biggest, as it were. So, first we're going to talk about two of my favorite two-player games. Both of these games were published by Z-Man. They're in a series, like a Game for Two series. I don't know if this series is continuing, but based on the quality of these two entries, I would probably buy the next one sight unseen. I think both of these games deserve to be in print all the time, and one of them has an expansion right now that's only available in German that breaks my heart that I cannot get in the US at this point. Hopefully that changes in the future, but let's just get to it. So the first one of these games for two is Targi. This is the game that has an expansion in German right now. You can get it from Germany. You can put paste-ups on it, but it's not available in English at all. This game is phenomenal. It is a two-player worker placement game. It uses a very intelligent design in which there's a grid of cards on the table. You place your workers along the outside grid, blocking off rows and columns, and then you get a third worker at the intersection of those two workers. And there's a bandit that moves around the edge of the board, blocking off rows and columns, changing it up as you go along. This game is always tight. It always plays well. There's a lot of, do I concentrate on helping myself or do I focus on hindering my opponent? How far ahead do I think I am? How far behind do I think I am? Which resources do I specifically need? Which do they need? There's a lot of consideration that goes into how you place your workers to carve up the board a little bit and make sure that you get yours and your opponent doesn't get theirs. The fact that it's a two-player game also lessens the sting of it being a more confrontational worker placement game. Like, there's no take-that mechanisms, there's no, removing things from other people, but every worker placement spot is not just, I'm denying you one spot, it's I'm denying you an entire row or column of spots. So it's got a little bit more confrontation to it, and it being two-player only really lessens the sting of that, because what else am I going to do? You're my only opponent. I have to kind of target you. It gets rid of a lot of bad feelings that I've seen develop in larger worker placement games that are a little bit more, in your face about how tight they are. But this is a fantastic game. I would buy the expansion in English in a heartbeat. I literally wouldn't even think about it. I would find money, even if it required, donating plasma or selling another game to get it. So, keep that in mind. The base game is fantastic. I love it, and it's never going anywhere out of my collection. The second game is in the same Game for Two series. It is a two-player game as well. It has gotten a recent reprint, and can be played with more than two if you actually have two copies, especially if the copies contain different colored pieces. And that is Akrotiri from the Bamboozle Brothers, Jay and Sen. This game is also phenomenal. I recommend it to anybody who likes two-player games. Whereas Targi is worker placement, this is pick up and deliver and set collection. And it has a very unique mechanism that I've not seen anywhere else, wherein you are basically building the board as you play, and you will place temples on the board, but the temples, the location of them isn't like a fixed thing. You determine where they go in the course of the game based on where things are and where the tile placement has happened. And once you've locked a temple onto an island, that island can't have another temple on it, and it kind of changes how the rest of the game plays from there. So you can do the pick up and deliver stuff. You can also do the set collection and playing temples. It's a fantastic two-player game, as I've said. It can be played with four if you have two sets. This is the original printing. It has player pieces in two colors. The updated reprint is a good two-player game in its own right. Don't let me say that, I've never played it with more than two players. And I think it's one of the best games in my collection. But you can play it four-player, and the reprint has different, unique colored player pieces from the original printing, and that facilitates that. It's something they didn't have to do, but it's kind of nice that they did. I don't know how it plays with 4, I don't know how it plays with 3, I just know that it's available as an option, and that intrigues me. This is a game that I like enough that I would love to encourage them to keep it in print indefinitely, so buying a second copy isn't out of the realm of possibilities for me, and maybe something that I do in the future, just so I can give 3 and 4 player a try, because it seems like it would be interesting. But another one of my favorite 2-player games is Akrotiri. Now, we'll go into, as I said, the next set of games is also a little bit of unique territory, and this is one that I absolutely love all of them. I have others, these just seem to be the only two in this particular box, so I'm sure we'll see more in future boxes, but that's the Oniverse series of games. In this case, I have Iram and Costelian in here. Iram is the first game, hence why they're called the Oniverse series. It's Land of Dreams. This game is one of the first solo games I ever played. It is a fantastic solo game. While I think Friday slightly edges it out as my favorite game to play on my own, this game is phenomenal solo. And it's even good two-player. My wife and I love to play the two-player version of this. It's very unique in that you kind of each have part of a hand of cards, and then there is a shared hand between you, and you can swap stuff between your hand and the shared hand. You alternate play, so you're very much playing with a partner. The new version of the game, which this one is, includes 7 expansions to change up gameplay. Some of them make it slightly easier, some of them make it slightly harder. If you play with all of them, the balance stays about the same, but there's so much more going on in the game that it plays like a totally different game. The application, the phone app version of this is phenomenal, but it doesn't have any of the expansion content in it. When it does, oh my gosh, I can't even imagine. But I've logged a ton of plays of it on my phone. I've logged a ton of plays of it in person. This is a fantastic game. The first review that Joel Eddy at Drive Thru Review did was Oniram, and it's what convinced me to get it. I got the original version, and then I've basically purchased every game and updated game in the series since then. Joel did not steer me wrong, and I'm hoping I'm not either. Oniram, however you wish to pronounce it, is fantastic. Costelian is another game in the series. This one is the first one that departs from cards. It's actually a tile-laying game, which is pretty neat. All of them prior to this one are very, very card-based. But this one uses tiles and is a... I hate to say this, it's probably my least favorite of the series, but that's like saying it's my least favorite flavor of ice cream. It's still ice cream, it's still really good, but it's probably the one I like the least out of them. Oniram is maybe my favorite, or is probably my second favorite, I think. We'll get to what my favorite is when it comes out of the box. And I haven't played the newest one, Natalion, yet. I will own it at some point. That will happen. But I haven't gotten a chance to try it as of yet, so I don't have it in the rankings. But this one's pretty good, and it's still 1 or 2 player, which is fantastic. Means I can play it on my own, learn it on my own, and then I can play it with my wife as a 2-player game. She doesn't spend as much time learning games, so having a game that I can play on my own and then just teach her the slight variances makes it really easy for me to get to the table. So yeah, the Oniverse games also really, really good games. I highly recommend the whole series. Your ranking will be different than mine. This video is going long, so we're gonna look at the next 2 together because they're sort of the same game with some slight changes, and that's the Resistance and the Resistance Avalon. This is the first hidden role social deduction game that I ever played. This one is a slightly updated version with new rules. This one has an expansion that basically put all of the rules from this one into this one. So they're pretty similar at this point. I mean, honestly, it's do you like the sci-fi theme or the King Arthur fantasy theme better as to which one I think you should play. If you don't like social deduction games, you're not going to like either one of these because these are nearly pure social deduction games. If you like social deduction games, I think you will probably love either one of these games. I personally kind of favor the sci-fi theme a little bit over the King Arthur one, but they're both solid games. They're basically the same game, and I really like both. I'm a big fan of social deduction games, so these are good ones. Alright, last two games in this set, in this box, and then we'll wrap it up. Robinson Crusoe, this is the first edition of the game. As you can tell by the gigantic box, the Z-Man rather than Portal Games label, and the old artwork on the cover. This is a really hard cooperative game. As I've said before, I love co-ops. I have beaten this game. I beat this game on my first try. In the first scenario, which gave me a false sense of how the rest of it would go. Not to say that it's not beatable, but beating it on your first go really kind of lulled me into a false sense of security, and I promptly went on a very large losing streak after that. So I said this is the first edition of the game. The second edition has some clarifications and updates and a different rule book, and it looks different. I'm content with my first edition right now. Haven't seen a real reason to change as of yet. Maybe that'll happen over time, but this one still plays just fine. So, Robinson Crusoe. And last but not least in this box is a game that I personally love and at the same time hate setting up, and that's Eclipse. This game looks like a 4X Ameritrash game, plays mostly like a Euro economic game. Other than the dice combat that's inside of it, you wouldn't even know that it's got any Ameritrash roots at all. It's a 4X game, although it's kind of like, I would say 3.5X, because the Explorer is a little bit weak in that it's very defined, at least in the base game. There are rings of tiles that are very specific as to what you can find in those rings. And in the base game, it's possible to memorize what the available options are, so you can actually do a statistical probability analysis of which ring you should explore based on what you're looking for. That's the kind of person that I've played this game with. I've also played with people who have absolutely no interest in that and are just looking to pew 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 with space lasers and missiles and upgrade all their ships and everything. The real innovation of this game to me isn't even pictured on the box very much, and that's the player boards, which have the ship blueprints that you can upgrade directly with technology tiles showing you what the capabilities of your ships are. And more importantly, and the part that makes it an absolute pain in the ass to set up, is all of your tracks of the different things that you can upgrade and change over time, like your science and your economy, are tracks that are covered with cubes, and you will use those cubes on the board, placing them on specific planets, and as you do, it'll change the stat on the board because you'll uncover new numbers. And the discs as well represent your upkeep, so the